We have to squeeze a 10-hour program into 3 hours. But I am a quasi-professional. I can pull this off, you know. First, this trial in Manhattan. You hear all the legal analysts. Your trial in Manhattan. So I got to thinking, watching this, or watching people reporting on it, commenting on it. Many of them say the same thing, and they say it brilliantly. And the vast majority of them are right. And I'm talking about Fox. Forget about CNN and MSNBC. They're a joke. But I got to thinking, as I tend to, as I'm reading two books at the same time, Mr. Producer. I've got one on my lap. I've got one on the end table, and I'm watching the reporters on Fox as I'm preparing for the program. This is such a debacle, this case. It is such a humiliation to the justice system. It is such a grotesque miscarriage of justice being executed by a judge, by the government through their prosecutors. That if there are any persuadable Supreme Court justices in the immunity case, they have to watch this. And they have to compare it to the arguments that were made by Jack Smith's boy, his lawyer, by the Department of Justice, and scratch their heads and say, if we don't figure out how to put this back in a box, we will destroy the judicial system. The judicial system will become the most political system in our country. The electoral process will be utterly unpredictable and subject to district attorneys and attorneys general and so forth tampering with it by using the judicial system. And we on the Supreme Court, there's going to be a never-ending conga line of cases that are brought to us on an emergency appeal basis. Do we really want to subject a judicial system that's been pretty good, not perfect, pretty good, over the course of the history of this republic, to the destruction that awaits it, that can consume it, if this isn't stopped? I'm talking about the immunity case. Now, some of you out there, lawyers and non-lawyers, who are really sharp, you're thinking, okay, look, wait. The immunity case has to deal with actions taken when a president's president, and then after he leaves the presidency, those actions are used perhaps in a criminal case against him, as they're trying to do with Trump. That's true. 100%. But the justices have to be thinking, okay, look, we had an argument here by the Biden administration with their lawyer, the Jack Smith lawyer, and he argued specifically that we have to trust prosecutors not to abuse the system. After all, they're public officials. They take an oath. They believe in a public trust. They won't politicize the process. They won't do it. That's what he argued. On top of that, when you take the Bragg case, where a prosecutor is doing in that case, and what a judge is doing in that case, and the thousands of district attorneys and assistant district attorneys and county prosecutors in this country, not to mention the 93 U.S. attorneys' offices overseen by a Department of Justice, and the ability to appoint special counsel, this thing can get way out of hand very fast. It already has. The justices have to look at the entire horizon here of what's going on in Manhattan, what's going on in Georgia, what Jack Smith has brought to this court, the same Jack Smith who was rejected by this court a decade or so ago in the Bob McDonnell case involving Virginia and the governor there and how he destroyed him, only to be reversed 8-0 by twisting the law. And Jack Smith's back. He's twisting the law again. He's demanding cutting corners on appeals. He's demanding that the Speedy Trial Act apply to the government, not to the defendant. He's using every dirty trick in the book. And the court has to decide, the Supreme Court, are we going to allow Jack Smith, Alvin Bragg, Fani Willis, those three, are we going to allow them to change the entire nature of our republic? The whole notion of separation of powers, the poisonous, cancerous destruction of our justice system, because of these three individuals, these three, are we going to allow the court system, particularly the federal court system, and the Supreme Court to be dragged into every one of these disputes that are going to be critical? A presidential race, a Senate race, a governor's race, who knows? Now that we've criminalized the election process, now that we have criminalized the entire justice system, now that we've allowed prosecutors to run amok, what are we, the Supreme Court, going to do about it? Now they have a case right in front of them. They can't just start ruling about all kinds of things, but they have a case right in front of them. This immunity case. And it is my hope, I won't yet say belief, but it is my hope that any justices who are sitting on the fence, watching what's taking place, the Federal Bill of Rights shredded with gag orders, a lack of due process. You don't even know what the hell the crime is. You don't even know who the witnesses are till 24 hours before. Evidence dumped into the trial. 30,000 documents. And still the judge moves on, a conflicted judge. They have to be watching this and saying, we can contribute to this. I don't care what Kagan says, or Jackson says, or Sotomayor says about their hypotheticals, their wild-eyed hypotheticals. We don't deal with wild-eyed hypotheticals in the Supreme Court. We deal with reality. We deal with practicality. We deal with the Constitution and the facts in front of us. And the facts in front of us tell us, look at what's happening in the country today. Is the problem that there aren't enough prosecutors prosecuting a former president? 91 charges. You got 34 charges in this one courtroom, which are outrageous. You have a dead state statute that he's trying to revive by claiming a federal offense that he will not describe that requires intent. How can you have intent to violate a federal offense that you can't describe? And there hasn't been a shred of evidence. 5 weeks that the defendant, Donald Trump, even knew about any federal campaign law. There is nothing on the record other than the testimony of a disgusting reprobate scumbag about what Donald Trump told him. Oh, okay, great. There's no evidence of anything that ties this to a federal campaign violation, and even if it tied it to the federal campaign laws, they weren't broken. How do we know? Because the FEC said so. This is Alice in Wonderland in 1984 combined. Alice in Wonderland in 1984 combined. So the question for the Supreme Court justices, other than the three radicals who are in the bag for Biden and the Democrat Party, the question for the other six is this. If you don't reject this case out of hand because it is the federal criminalization of what were previously normal, regular, historical campaign practices with a separate set of electors, with contacting election officials. Notice they don't have a single act of outright electoral or voting improprieties. Nothing. The act of sending a second set of electors, the act of challenging an election, the act of saying an election wasn't accurate, the act of asking, are there any more votes in the... You understand what prosecutors can do with this to anybody at any time. To allow Jack Smith to criminalize a process that is rough and tumble, it requires a lot of give and take, that is not the prettiest process in the world, but it is a free electoral process that is addressed and any issues resolved by the political process, by the states, by the Congress, not by the courts, certainly not by the federal courts, certainly not at the instigation of a criminal prosecutor. If they allow this immunity case to go forward, they will do severe damage to the electoral process. They will do severe damage to the justice system. Now, if it goes forward and they rule based on the information that the government insists they rule on, and if they rule for the government, it's over. The justice system will eventually collapse by the weight of the litigation. The electoral system will never be trusted again. And you will have lawfare for the rest of the time, times 1,000 of what's going on today. Local judges elected, local judges appointed, federal appellate judges, the Supreme Court. It'll be non-stop. And it'll become much more difficult to figure out the boundaries. So now the court, as I speak to you, the Supreme Court. By the way, who else addresses these things the way I do? I look at what's going on. I can tell you about the federal law I have. I can tell you about the state law I have. I can tell you about Cohen's testimony I have. But it's beyond that. It's bigger than that. Much bigger than that. The Supreme Court, the timing is perfect, has a case in front of it where it needs to decide if it's going to allow this sort of thing and even contribute to it. It has a prosecutor who's unconstitutionally appointed by every serious analysis of his appointment. 2 former attorneys general think so. So do I. You have a case that has been criminalized the political process. One of the allegations against Trump is the criminalization of free speech. Well, the Hitler Youth are running around doing pretty much whatever they want. Oh, that's free speech, but not Trump. They're going to take bad facts, the bad abuse of law, the targeting of Donald Trump, and they're going to use that to destroy our country because Jack Smith says so? So what the court should do is, on reflection, the majority, say this case should never have been brought here. The allegations, the criminalization of politics, we're sending it to the lower courts. We're not accepting the way this case has been presented. We're not accepting the lower courts embracing it. That would be a major move. I understand it takes courage. But we need courage. We need a Marbury versus Madison. We need a Brown versus Board of Education. We need big ideas, big thoughts from big people who will do the right thing. We need a seminal decision. The justices are not equipped because nobody's equipped to do what Jack Smith is demanding them to do. To redefine the office of the presidency based on charges brought by Jack Smith. So the Manhattan case demonstrates, as many have before, no, prosecutors are not to be trusted. That's not the way the system works. Number 2, a president has to have immunity after he leaves office. There will be no end to this. They will open a door to everything. And number 3, this case in front of the court is an utterly bogus case. It attempts to draw in constitutional issues, and it does. The criminalization of politics is the destruction of the republic.